Hi, I'm Tim Belcher. Welcome back to the channel. Over the last couple of weeks, I've seen a couple of Spider-Man projects on the laser forums on Facebook. One was an acrylic lit up LED sign, and one was this one behind me, an original Spiderman-clock. I thought it'd be fun to try our hand at making something like this. So let's make a Spider-Man themed clock. This is how I made it. So I have my image, and even though it's a transparent PNG, I'll convert it to a vector with Image Vectorizer and then open that EPS file with Affinity Designer. And at this point, I'm just playing with the image, just exploring what it takes to edit it for the layers in my design. I first copy the shape and turn off the visibility of my original, and then I choose Geometry Separate Curves, and that explodes this shape into more than 100 subshapes. The point here is to cut out the eyes of what will become a red layer under the black. I find the eyes and group them, and then I'll get rid of all the other shapes except the last. That last shape, when you separate curves, is usually the outline of the entire original. I will make those eyes white and then move them on top of the black outline shape, and then I'll select the three shapes and subtract them, and that will cut the eyes from the outline. I'll make that layer red, turn on the original black shape, and voila, we have a two-layer Spider-Man. And if I were to really simplify this project, that's what I'm going to do over and over again, each time with a little more complexity, to design the entire project. Now follow me here. The original red layer you saw, I'll just change the color to blue in a bit. For now, I'll turn it off, and let's make a red layer that cuts away everything so the blue can show through where it needs to. Same as before, I copy the original black and white and explode that geometry. And this time I go through and delete all the shapes that are supposed to be red. What I'm left with are the areas I want to cut out of the red layer. I'll make them white and eventually cut them through. I should have done this the opposite way, by just selecting all the areas that should have been blue and copying those shapes out. But I was learning the best process as I went along. There were just a few touch-ups. I had to select and cut out the eyes, as well as some small areas between his knees that pierced the entire artwork. But now I knew how to do the Spidey part, so it was time to go make a clock. My original idea was an outer ring and an inner ring, all connected by some sort of web. So I'll start with a 10-inch circle. The first inner circle is 7 inches, and then a 4-inch circle in the middle. I draw some alignment lines around the circle, and then a series of lines radiating out from the center at 30 degrees for the placement of the numbers. I choose a font that I think will work well with this layered design, and I can use the auto alignment features in Affinity Designer to make sure that those are centered on the point they need to be. Then I'll just thicken some lines, fill the center, and that just gets me to a starting point. I grab a random geometric web shape for a background, and then see how it looks as I use it as a mask for the numbers. And I'm skipping a lot of the combine and subtract functions I needed to do for these circle shapes. I thought this concept looked promising, but I didn't like some of the details with it. So I'll skip through the next hour or two of me trying different options. Trying to cut the numbers out of the web to make them more readable. Trying if I could incorporate text into the clock somehow. Just playing to see what looked good. Some ideas stuck and some didn't. I was also playing with a Spider-Man image and clock placement. At some point I rotated the Spider-Man and suddenly it looked like he was hanging from his hand, and I thought that looked really good. And it left enough room on this 12 by 20 artboard for about an 8-inch clock face. And then I just played with placement, trying to get the size and angles right, and trying to guess what the center of gravity would be if I hung this by his hand. In the end, this was the design for the clock that I felt looked best, a much simplified web background, and I both cut out the centers of the numbers from the web mask as well as connected all the internal number shapes with lines to make them effectively stencils. At this point, my document was a bit too complex, and I wanted to simplify the shape. So I exported everything and re-vectorized it, if that's a word, and started with a fresh single shape that was flattened. People with more skill than me will likely cringe at that, but sometimes the faster way is just easier. And starting fresh, using all the playing around I did earlier, it was relatively easy to recreate my layers for the design in a reasonably clean document. Once I had something I thought would work, I threw the layers into Fusion 360 just to get a look at it in 3D, and the only change I needed to make was to make the cutouts and the numbers a little wider to make the blue background more visible. I was going to be using painted MDF for my layers, and if you watched my last video, I was concerned about how to glue layers together that had one painted surface. So I'll use the laser to etch the paint where the layer above will be glued, so the blue layer will have a cut line for the outline and etching of the red layer above it. The etch will let the glue set into the wood and create a better bond than paint would provide. To be honest, with something this small, I think you could likely skip this step. In Lightburn, that's reflected as a line for the outline that will cut through, and a line and fill for the etch portion using a much less aggressive setting, using a DPI of about 12 lines per inch. And if this preview doesn't explain that, I think you'll get it later in the video. Alright, let's cut some stuff. I'm going to use some cheap picture hangers to create a standoff for this first blue layer. When you paint these boards, they tend to cup a little toward the paint. And with the hangers in place, I can simply flatten the board back by taping the edges down to the bed with a little bit of tension. I can then check my focus and alignment, and we're ready to go. So like I said, it'll first do that line and etch everywhere the red layer will be above it, and then it'll do the cut, which for the blue layer is the outline and just a few small shapes. I cleaned it with just a little isopropyl alcohol, just because it's easier to do at this point, and we're ready to move on to the red layer. This layer was processed the same way, but this time there was a little reward seeing layers together for the first time. And finally the black, which I find fascinating to watch. While the black was cutting, I could start the glue up. And for this, I'm simply using thick-set CA glue, and I'm taking my time and trying to use it sparingly. I'm also taking my time with the lineup so I don't have to move the shape much after pressing it down. The black layer took a lot more time to weed, obviously. It was also more difficult to glue considering it had so many smaller shapes. I just took my time and it worked perfectly. I needed the hand to stand off the wall the same depth as the clock mechanism. So I simply cut 3 hanger shapes and glued them together into the back of the hand. A couple of coats of clear semi-gloss, and it was on to attaching the clock. And with that, this project was done, or should have been, but I liked the design too much, and I wanted to try it in acrylic. Cast acrylic cuts like a dream. Now I used an extra thick CA for this because I wanted to avoid the mess that acrylic cements leave behind. I'll warn you though, the fumes from CA and acrylic are quite harsh, so mask up. I also got a bit smarter on the glue up and used the cutouts from the first 2 layers to create a gluing guide. And that worked really well to get the alignment almost perfect. As for the hanger on this one, I realized from the first clock that the perfect center of balance is from Spider-Man's middle finger. So this time I simply copied 3 layers of the outline from the hand. This has the added effect of actually making his hand touch the wall. And with the clock, now we were done. Hey, if you enjoyed this, give the video a like and consider subscribing. It really is the best thing you can do for a small channel. Hopefully this video was good enough that you don't need my files to make this project. But if you do, I am going to throw them up on Etsy. A link will be in the description down below. And as always, thanks for watching.